What's up guys, it's Tevin here, back again with another video, and today I wanted to talk about my impressions of Android 9 Pie. And ironically enough, this is going to be my first video recorded on my new iPhone XS. However, this is probably my favorite release of Android so far, so don't let that discourage you. If you're curious onto why I actually got an iPhone, go ahead and watch last month's video where I talk about the reasons for changing. It's a bit of a ramble, so if that's not your kind of video, totally understand. But basically it comes down to a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of frustration, and I don't know, yeah, just things have happened and I'm pretty happy with my purchase so far. But maybe we'll get into that in next month's video, we'll see. For now, it's all about Pie. Let's get into it. So one of the biggest changes for Android 9 Pie was the gesture navigation. A lot of people would say that it's a big copy of what Apple did with the iPhone X, but honestly I think it was kind of a necessary step in the whole evolution of everything, and I really enjoyed it. It's not a one-to-one copy of the iOS one, and in some ways it's a little bit better, in some ways it's a little bit worse. So on iOS, to get home, you basically swipe up from the bottom, kind of throwing your app away. However, on Android, you just click the navigation button that's at the very bottom. So now there's more like one navigation button. Maybe you have a back button depending on the scenario, but it's this little pill that you see at the bottom. And so to go home, you just tap that, and I think that's a really good idea. First of all, you're not directly copying Apple, and it's more familiar to users that have been using Android and are used to the navigation button. One of the biggest changes is how to enter in multitasking. So unlike the previous versions of Android, there is not a dedicated button for multitasking. So now what you do is you swipe up. This is a little bit similar to iOS, but this is one of the areas where I think Android actually has a bit of an advantage. On iOS, it's a little bit weird to get into multitasking. You kind of have to swipe up and either go left or right a little bit or hold it there for a second before you actually enter in the multitasking view. So going home and multitasking are blended together in a very similar action and can be confusing for new users. However, I'm sure once you get used to it, it's not a problem, and it hasn't been for me. Objectively though, Android's way of doing this does make a little bit more sense to me. You tap the pill to go home, and you swipe up to enter in multitasking. It's a pretty natural flow, in my opinion. Once in the multitasking view, you can swipe left or right to go through your apps, which is a little bit different in Android 8.0, and before you were going up and down. So this is a little bit more similar to iOS, but they did it for a different reason other than just trying to copy Apple. So now you can actually give the little pill at the bottom a quick flick to the right to go to the last app that you used, which is similar to double tapping the multitasking button. You can also hold on to that pill as you drag it, and you can actually begin to navigate through your recent apps just by dragging your finger across that pill. I think this is pretty cool. iOS is something similar, but you can only swipe between one app at a time. This lets you go back, if you know you need to go back, say 6 apps or something like that, or maybe roughly in that area, you can do it pretty quickly. You can find the app that you need, and you can get to what you're doing. So this is where I think Android has another leg up on the competition, though it's not extremely seamless. It does feel a little bit jerky, a little bit janky, but it does get the job done. The back button is probably, in my opinion, one of the worst things about this new navigation system. I think the multitasking, going home, even navigating through your recent apps by dragging the pill makes a lot of sense. I think it works really well, but the back button has kind of been this weird thing that they couldn't really figure out how to handle it well. So the back button pops up in basically every scenario where you would imagine it would, and it works just the same as it used to, but it's a little weird. It feels kind of dated, and it doesn't really match the new style of the navigation bar. We will see what Google does with this in the future, but right now it kind of seems like an afterthought. Once you get used to everything, it doesn't really seem like a hindrance necessarily, but it's not exactly as future forward as the rest of the gesture navigation. There is one more addition to the navigation bar that I almost forgot that I have been a huge fan of, and honestly, I really hope it comes to iOS soon, and that is temporary rotation. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably have rotation lock on 90+% of the time. Depending on what I'm doing, I really don't want my phone to auto-rotate. I hardly ever put it in landscape unless I'm showing off a picture or something like that. And then it often gets a little frustrating because I will forget that I don't have rotation on. I'll go to rotate my phone it won't rotate. You swipe down on the quick settings, click on auto rotate, and go on about your day. This is fine. It works, and this is what people have to do on iOS. It's not like a huge problem. However, Google has found a way to solve this and make just it's so good. It's so good, and it's one of these things that I would have never thought of. So now, when you go to rotate your device while auto rotate is off, in the navigation bar on the right side, you will get a little icon to prompt you to temporarily rotate your device. This is very unobtrusive, and once you click it, your device will rotate until you either rotate back and click that button again, or until you lock your phone, and then we'll go straight back to the orientation that you had it set at previously. So this is a really nice way of just totally getting rid of the need to drop down your quick settings. It prompts you, and it's very obvious to what it's doing. And I think it's a feature that was very well thought out, very well designed, and like I said, I hope it comes to iOS in the next release because it was so nice when I was using it. The volume slider also got some really cool improvements. Now, from what I've learned just recently, it's actually a little bit more similar to how iOS behaves in terms of what volume or what ringer is actually default when you're hitting the volume buttons. So previously, by default, it would change the ringer. And in all reality, I don't change my ringer volume that often. In fact, when I change it, it's usually going down to silence it. So I don't have a need to change my ringer volume hardly ever. What I usually am after is the media volume, and now that is default. The volume slider also provides a couple extra shortcuts to easily get into vibration mode or silent, and you can also mute the media volume very quickly by tapping the little icon there. And also, it gives you a little shortcut to go deeper into the audio settings, so if you do want to change your ringer volume, you can, not a problem. And also, if you didn't notice, it was showing up on the side as opposed to at the top of the screen. So this makes it easier to actually reach with your thumb, and in general is a very pleasing experience that is very beneficial to the user. So props to you, Google. I really like the improvements there. Keep it up. Now, the next thing I noticed was ambient display improvements. Ambient display is something that I have enjoyed greatly on Android, and I'd really like to see it progress, and this iteration is no different. So now, built into Google's stock Android, ambient display now features, optionally, calendar events and weather. This is actually basically mapped to your home screen. So on the Pixel launcher, there is this kind of at-a-glance widget that's built into the first page that shows your weather, the time, next calendar event, and you can kind of toggle this, and those toggles actually go one-to-one to the lock screen or the ambient display as well. So that's pretty neat. It's something that I already miss on my iPhone, being able to see the weather on the lock screen. It's not super necessary, but it's a nice little addition. You can pull your phone out of your pocket, not even have to hit the power button. You can see the time, the weather, potentially what you have coming up on your calendar. And overall, I think it's a very well thought out thing and works really well. I've had no issues with weather accuracy or anything like that, or it not updating quick enough. Honestly, haven't thought about it too much. It's just there and it works very well. I do really hope that this rolls out to other manufacturers. I know some other manufacturers have done their own implementation of something very similar, but I really like how this is working, and I hope that we don't continue to reinvent the wheel when features like these come out and manufacturers adopt them. Android 9 also got a little bit of a facelift. It's nothing too dramatic, but it's definitely a bit more round. It's a bit more white. You can see that the quick settings is just blindingly white. The settings app itself is blindingly white. But along with that, they did kind of introduce a little bit of a dark theme. Now, it's not quite what everyone's been wanting, but it's kind of neat, and I'll give it to them. I'll say it's pretty cool, and I enjoyed using it. By default, it will actually register off of your wallpaper. So if your wallpaper is dark enough, it will start using a dark theme that you'll find in some of the UI elements and definitely the quick settings. But this is also toggleable in the settings. You can force it to always stay on, and that's pretty cool. There's a couple of small things, like the font has been updated, something that most people probably won't notice. I think it's a nice looking font. I mean, it looks pretty cool, but not something I care about too much in general. And also the clock is on the left now, basically as a way to balance out notch phones, so there isn't too much content on the right that spills over in the center, so now it's a little bit more evenly distributed. This was something I didn't really like at first, but I quickly got used to and didn't really think about anymore. But some people really don't like it, especially because it's accommodating a notch, which people also don't like. If the clock was something that really irritated you, let me know in the comments. I got used to it really quickly, and I think you will too, but I'm curious. We also got some Bluetooth enhancements in several different ways. First of all, there's a revamped Bluetooth or connected devices option area in the settings. And honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this. It's gotten a little bit more confusing. There's like a pair new device button, a previously connected devices section, even though I think all of this could be displayed in one single menu, and it actually was. I don't know why it got more complicated, and as I've used it, I've gotten a little confused, and when I think about the average user, honestly, this has to be a disaster. I know Bluetooth isn't something that people go into all the time unless they have headphones they're constantly connecting, maybe some other peripherals, but in general it doesn't feel like a very user thought out thing, like a normal layman user would get confused using this. Compared to some of the other features that have been introduced in this release, it's pretty confusing. I feel like a lot of the other features had a lot of thought and consideration in them, and this one didn't, and I don't see any benefit from changing it. You know, it comes back to one of the whole, if it's not broken, don't fix it kind of things. This falls right into that category, and I hope they change, I hope they improve it, because I'm not happy. Not happy at all with it. Bluetooth connectivity also got a bit of an update that's more on par now with what Samsung and Apple are doing, and it basically allows you to have a Bluetooth headset connected for audio output and a speaker as well. The biggest use case I found for this is if I have Bluetooth headphones connected and then I get into a car and my car speakers connect to my phone, then it will start playing out of my car speakers instead. So 2 Bluetooth audio devices connected, and it knows how to handle switching that over. However, there's a big downside. There's a very reliably repeatable bug where once you turn off, say, the car speakers, the audio doesn't return to the headset, and instead starts playing out of the phone speakers even though the headset Bluetooth device is still connected. This has been really frustrating for me, and I've honestly played audio out of my speakers a couple times and I really didn't mean to, in kind of an awkward situation. Nothing too bad, but it's a little frustrating. It's something that you definitely don't experience as a user. Half of it was like magic and half of it was just irritating. I really hope it's something that Google fixes in the future, but for right now, I'm not a huge fan. And in general, it seems like they really have thought out this whole feature, because once you have both devices connected, especially with audio, there's not an easy way to just choose which audio source you want to go out to. The phone does work. On the phone dialer app, there is a way to just choose, do you want it to go out in your speaker, your phone's speakerphone, headset, car, or whatever. It gives you the Bluetooth audio devices, but I didn't see that anywhere for just music or anything else, and this is something that Apple has covered too. So, I don't know. It's one of these things where it's like, if you're going to implement this new feature, you've got to make sure you do it really, really well. I like the direction they're going, and I hope they improve it and don't take it away, but right now, I don't know. I don't know. Android's Bluetooth stack has been a bit of a mess. It gets better and worse and better and worse, it seems like every year. They just, one after the other. I hope they fix it up, because it's so frustrating. Overall, the Bluetooth enhancements weren't really welcome to me, and I hope they work on these. I did like how they did put a couple little touches into the UI where they utilized the vibration motor a little bit more. The biggest instance of this is when you pull down the notification tray, you get just a very subtle vibration, and I don't know, it's just something that makes the operating system feel a little bit more alive. I enjoy it and hope they continue to do that too. There's also a couple of enhancements to the way that the operating system handles apps and permissions. Namely, when an app is not in the foreground, it can't access the microphone or the camera. So if your phone is locked, you're not running an app directly, say you're using a different app, you're texting or something like that, a rogue app in the background can't just be using your microphone, listening to what you're doing, taking pictures, maybe of you, maybe of your foreground or your surroundings or whatever, which is really nice. This is stuff that has been a benefit and a downside to Android, the excessive amount of permissions that apps can have, and I think there's a logical reason for having limitations on some of these things. So good on Google for doing that. Personally, don't know of any apps that maybe were hindered by this, that utilize those as a feature, and hopefully there's not a ton, there's not a lot of unhappy users out there, but I think overall it's probably worth the security trade-off. Now it's time to get into a couple of the other main flagship features that Google has been touting with this release of Android, and that is on-device machine learning and digital well-being. So the first on-device machine learning feature that was really touted was the adaptive battery. So this is a really cool thing in theory, but it didn't really make much of a difference for me personally. Basically, Google says that Android will start monitoring what apps you use, when you use them, how often you use them, and kind of determine, do you need this running in the background? Do you need this running in the background while you're at work? How often should this check for background updates? Essentially as a way to very easily and automatically catering to your needs and your use cases so it can optimize battery as much as possible. Now maybe this is just a reflection of how I use my phone, how many apps I use, and how often I use them. Probably too many and too much and too often, but it didn't really seem to make a huge difference for me. I've heard people saying that it made a massive difference on their battery life, and it's, maybe not 2 times better, but significantly better, and good for them. If that's you, then that's awesome, and please tell me about it in the comments. I'd love to hear some of your comments on this and experiences, but for me it didn't really make much of a difference. I also didn't really notice my apps behaving any differently, so I guess that's a good thing, but I do worry about some apps that maybe I do want notifications for, I do want background processing here and there, and it could be very important, but I don't actually actively open that app very often. Maybe it's an app for work that I don't actually use, but when I do get a notification, I want it immediately. So I don't know, it's not something that I had any issues with, but I think I would need longer exposure to it, and I don't know, maybe to play around with some of the settings to see if I can really squeeze out some extra battery life with it. Adaptive brightness. So this is one that I actually did have a really positive experience with. Basically, Google takes the current light environment, the current light levels, and when you adjust the volume or the brightness slider, it will actually say, okay, at this light, you actually like it to be this bright. Or when it's this dark, you want it to be really dark. And then Google starts learning that, starts copying that, and starts doing that automatically for you. And that worked out very well for me. I noticed within the first couple days of using Android 9 that it started working way better. I started having a much better experience with my auto brightness and whatnot. And also, when I actually returned to Android 8, because I first experienced this on the beta, when I first returned back to Android 8 and used it for a couple days, I immediately noticed how off my brightness was. Auto brightness has never been something that I've been super happy with on Android. I always thought the light levels were different than what I would do it, whether it was too bright in too unnecessary situations and I wanted to lower it to save some battery, or it was too dark, it wasn't bright enough. I don't know, it just always seemed a little off, but after using that for a few days, it actually worked out really well and I stopped thinking about auto brightness. So a couple other things that, maybe I noticed a little bit of benefit of, but not much. Better predictive apps in your launcher. So when you swipe up and go to the app drawer, you'll have a few predictive apps, and that's kind of cool. It's supposed to take into consideration your location, the time of day, how often you use apps, and try to present something that you actually want to use. And I never thought it was terrible. It always was decent. When I used it again, it was decent. It's just a little weird because it's not something I rely on. It's much quicker for me to put an icon on my home screen, know where it's at, so I can get to it immediately instead of opening up the app drawer. Oh, is there an app in here that I actually want to use? Oh no, now I have to go find it. So it seems like an unnecessary step for me, but you guys let me know. Did it work out really well for you? Maybe the dream is that you don't ever actually have to look for an app or go to your home screen or anything like that. You can just go to your app drawer and pick an app, but there's only 4 apps on display, so I feel like, I don't know, I use way more than 4 apps even within an hour's time period, so I don't know. It didn't really do much good for me. It's something I kind of forgot about, but I don't know. Maybe it'll get better, and maybe it'll be really useful, and maybe your phone will just start telling you what app you want to use. Kind of in a similar vein as predictive actions, which is something that Google kind of made a big deal out of. In the app drawer as well, maybe you have a predictive action that aligns with some of the shortcuts on the apps. So if you long press an icon on your home screen, then you get some shortcuts on a lot of apps. Maybe it was a messaging app where you could compose a new message, phone dialer app, your recent calls or something like that. And these predictive actions would show just a couple of shortcuts that you might want to use. Again, these are not things that I was looking for, and even then, there was nothing ever that I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to do that. That's what I was going to the app drawer for. Not really. Not really. And I never turned them off because I was kind of hopeful that something like that would happen, but it's just one of those features that I forgot about is probably taking up unnecessary amounts of power or consuming unnecessary amounts of data and sending it up to Google. So For me, I'll leave it, but again, if you like it, let me know. I would love to hear. So let's get on to digital well-being. It seems like both Apple and Google are very concerned about our digital health lately. We're using our phones too much, we're getting too many notifications, all this other stuff, and it was okay. I don't know. I don't think this thing is personally right for me. I don't need limitations on opening apps. I don't need timers on apps. A lot of what I use my phone for is actually productive things. So whether it's to-do lists, email, calendar, stuff like that. That's most of what I use my phone for, not games or social media as much. I don't need to limit myself on these things. So it didn't really, give me a whole lot of benefit, but I could see it being really useful for certain people. There was a kind of neat feature that I turned on briefly called wind down, which would basically make your whole phone grayscale, black and white. It would put on do not disturb so you wouldn't see any notifications or anything like that. Everything was silenced, basically trying to encourage you to go to bed. Like, hey, look, it's time to go to bed. We're basically locking down your phone. And again, this was something that was kind of frustrating for me because I don't have an issue going to bed or putting down my phone or anything like that. And if I'm staying up late, it's probably for a good reason. And so that was just kind of in my way. I don't know, I think it's a neat feature, and I think it's a good option, but nothing that should be put on by default by any means. Another weird little plus about Android 9 was that during the beta, a lot more devices were available. There was a couple of Xiaomi devices, maybe a Sony. I don't remember exactly what the list was, but it was pretty cool to see all these different devices be beta eligible, and it was all thanks to Project Treble. That just made it so much easier to get these builds on there without really having to modify a lot of the treble, low level. A lot of it's just the, framework layer on top, in layman's terms and whatnot. But if it's going to benefit these other manufacturers and let people try the beta version of Android, which had no modifications, by the way, it was like stock Android, which is pretty sweet. I think it's a great thing, and I think there's going to be more and more of this, and updates are going to be coming more and more regularly for these manufacturers that actually adopt Project Treble. So it's just awesome to see that whole initiative actually taking hold and showing some real benefit. So good on Google. I really hope they make more improvements like that. I don't think Project Treble is the end game for that kind of feature, so hopefully we see more and more ways that Google can help speed up the ability for manufacturers to actually push out these updates. So how do I feel about all this? I kind of gave little play-by-plays throughout all of these different things. Overall, I think this is one of my favorite versions of Android for a lot of the positive features. However, I do think there's a few things that have annoyed me, a few bugs that really annoyed me, and it's not a mind-blowing new release. There aren't mind-blowing new features, and in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like Apple or Google is chasing Apple's tail, especially with some of the UI enhancements. A lot of the apps and a lot of the UI start to feel very sterile to me, very white, which is not something I'm a fan of on the iPhone. But it's the direction they're going in, and if you don't like it, I guess you can buy a different phone. Hopefully in the next couple iterations of Android, they'll have a real genuine theme engine and you can go that route, but right now it's not the case. So take it or leave it. It's a pretty good release, but by no means is not my favorite, and it's not giving me the sense of excitement that past Android releases have. I don't know, maybe it'll change. Maybe it's all me. Maybe I just need to take a break for a while, like I'm doing right now. Maybe in a year I'll come back, maybe two, and it'll be way better, and I'll, be back home and be happy again. But for right now, I'm not super unhappy with Android, but I think it's time to take a break. What about you guys? Is Android 9 a really good release for you guys? Is it something that you're looking forward to getting on your devices? Or is it a bit of a disappointment? And are you switching to iOS as well? I'd love to hear. Please leave a comment down below. And yeah, this is pretty much it. I didn't want to go too detailed. I didn't want to give, a whole top to bottom review on this. This is really kind of my mid-ranged impressions. It's not exactly my first impressions because I've been using it for a while, but yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think. So anyways, thank you guys so much for this video. This is, me recording on a new device and trying out some new stuff, so please let me know what you think, and I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.